Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. This is the account with a report for day 418 of the war in Ukraine. Today I have updates on recently surfaced confession videos by former Wagner mercenaries. All other updates are grouped into the usual situation inside Ukraine, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, and international developments. Before we start the news though, the flashpoints along the front. Crimea. Fighting is currently concentrated in the Serebryantsk forest south of Crimea, where Russia is launching attacks west of Shipilivka, and in Bilohorivka, where Russia has been slowly advancing. The general situation here is very confusing due to the fog of war, but reports from both sides more or less agree that Russian troops are achieving minor successes. Bakhmut. Russia continues to make small advances inside Bakhmut. In the north of Bakhmut, the occupiers managed to conquer territory almost as far as Rose Alley, which leads from the Pivnichny reservoir to the northern end of the Bakhmut railway station, marked here. The southwestern section remains unchanged, although Russian forces are trying to break through at Ivanivske. Avdiivka. Russia continues assaults along the railway leading to Avdiivka, marked here. Enemy units are trying to cross the railway and advance on Stepove. Meanwhile, Ukrainian artillery is massively shelling the major railway hub at Yazynu-Vata, east of Avdiivka, to interrupt supplies. Marinka. Ukrainian forces continue to hold the line in Marinka despite all odds and massive artillery bombardment. Russia had some success east of Popyeda, recapturing positions lost in the past weeks. Intelligence data suggests that Russia has withdrawn 2 airborne units from Marinka for reconstitution. And to start the news segment, the updates on the recently surfaced confession videos by former Wagner mercenaries. Due to the nature of the committed war crimes, I advise you to skip this segment if you cannot handle this kind of information. Viewer discretion is advised. Former convicts and Wagner mercenaries have confessed to serious war crimes committed in Bakhmut and Soledar. According to the confession, several incidents were pieced together. One of the Wagnerites admits that he shot a 5-year-old girl in the head when they went to Soledar in Bakhmut. She screams, "She is a small child, you understand. I shot a 5 to 6-year-old girl in the head." During another incident, more than 20 Ukrainian children and teenagers were shot. Peaceful residents were going outside, and there was an order. Everyone aged 15 and over, shoot all of them at once. 20 to 24 people were shot, 10 of them were 15-year-old and 17-year-old teenagers. When asked how many unarmed civilians they killed in February 2023, Savichev, one of the mercenaries, replied that 15-year-old Ukrainians are difficult to call civilians. Yet another incident was described as follows. The basement of a 9-story building in Bakhmut was to be cleared. 300 to 400 civilians inside, including 40 children. There was no choice, the order was to kill everyone. Furthermore, it was recounted how a pit was blown up, which was holding 50 injured Ukrainian POWs and so-called 500 refuseniks, Russians who didn't agree to kill Ukrainians. The mercenaries also admitted that the Wagnerites do not take prisoners and practice killing Ukrainian soldiers. Mainly with a knife, we cut the throat, we film it. When Prigozhin said sledgehammer, we took a sledgehammer and killed with a sledgehammer. This is his method. He is a horrible person. The interview was conducted by Gulagu.net, a Russian anti-corruption, anti-torture human rights organization and website. The video of the interviews is available on YouTube, but age-restricted. The head of the presidential office, Andriy Yermak, responded to the confessions, stating that Ukraine will investigate every Russian war crime, identify those responsible, and bring them to justice. A look at all the minor updates out of Ukraine. I did not find this information until after yesterday's report, but it seems that both the Orthodox Church of Ukraine and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate held Easter services in the same iconic Kiev-Pechersk Lavrov monastery complex, but in different churches and at different times. Still, it was the first time when an Easter service was held in Ukrainian by the Orthodox Church of Ukraine in the Lavrov, Ukraine's most important Orthodox monastery. I do not have access to the source article by the Ukrainian State Emergency Service. However, according to Ukrinform, the floods mentioned in yesterday's report have increased. Currently, a total of 916 households and 225 houses remain flooded. Additionally, 10,747 hectares of agricultural lands are also inundated as reported yesterday. Transport services were interrupted across 30 settlements, and rescuers delivered 24.1 tons of drinking water and 260 kilograms of food products. A total of 1,344 residents were transported through the flooded areas, and 22 people were evacuated. 10,570 cubic meters of water was pumped out from 79 households. The Ukrainian State Emergency Service is using drones to assess the flooded areas from the sky. According to the Kherson Regional Military Administration, 287 base stations and 3 mobile stations are in operation, providing mobile communications to the oblast. Additionally, 160 specialists are working hard to restore electrical supply to customers. According to the National Security and Defense Secretary Oleksiy Danilov, Ukraine has so far not found any Chinese weapons used by Russia on the battlefield. Sarah Bills, a former US Navy officer, was involved in the management of the pro-Russian social media account Donbas Devushka, which leaked at least 4 classified documents. One of the biggest spreaders of pro-Kremlin disinformation and propaganda, who posed online as a Russian Jewish woman from Luhansk, turned out to be a middle-aged divorced woman from New Jersey and a US Navy veteran. She was exposed by members of the North Atlantic Fellow Organization, NAFO, an online community that fights Russian propaganda. Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov has apologized for his interview with Spanish newspaper La Razón, during which he stated that the losses of the armed forces were less than the number of people killed in the earthquake in Turkey. During an interview with Ukrainska Pravda, Dmytro Lubinets, the Verkhovna Rada Commissioner for Human Rights, reported that 86% of Ukrainian soldiers who came back from Russian captivity have stated that they had been subjected to direct physical torture. On the topic of the recently surfaced war crime video, he commented that over the past 9 months, the Office of the Ombudsman has received dozens of videos of public executions of Ukrainian military personnel by Russian soldiers. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. Petro Andriushchenko, the advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, reported that 29 apartment blocks in the Primorsky district of Mariupol have been demolished, calling it a desert. The Ministry of Culture and Information Policy advertised that on April 18th, the National Museum of History of Ukraine will open a photo exhibition called Inscribed in History, Ruined by War, dedicated to the historical heritage of Mariupol destroyed by Russian attacks. Russian authorities in the temporarily occupied Crimea have begun installing video surveillance cameras along the railways to detect sabotage efforts by local partisans. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. Social media users in Russia have reported that a drone exploded in Belgorod. According to some, the drone hit a power substation. Local Telegram channels report problems with electricity supply in the city, while regional authorities have confirmed fires at civilian facilities. A court in Moscow has sentenced Russian opposition politician and journalist Vladimir Kara-Murza to 25 years in prison on charges of treason and spreading fakes about the war since April 2022. Viktor Medvedchuck, the former Ukrainian MP suspected of high treason, who was exchanged for Ukrainian prisoners, has written a pseudo-historical article accusing the Ukrainian authorities of Nazism and described the idea of creating a tribunal for President Volodymyr Zelensky and not Vladimir Putin, the godfather to his daughter. Correctional facilities in 35 regions of Russia have lost 17,000 inmates during the war in Ukraine. Neither the Federal Penitentiary Service of Russia, nor Prigozhin or the Ministry of Defense of Russia published any official information about the number of inmates recruited to fight in the war. At a meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, Shoigu reported to Putin on the progress of the Pacific Fleet exercise, while the Russian president called Ukraine a priority for the Russian army and stated the need to increase combat readiness of all naval fleets, not just the Pacific Fleet. Electronic conscription notices in Russia will begin being sent out in test mode during the spring conscription. In particular, in Moscow, conscription for military service will be carried out through the Gozuslugi portal. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has arrived in Brazil, where he plans to meet not only with his Brazilian counterpart, but also with Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. On the second day of their meeting in the Japanese city of Karuizawa, the foreign ministers of the G7 countries will discuss Russia's war against Ukraine and increasing pressure on Moscow. Top diplomats of the world's 7 most industrialized countries and the European Union plan to discuss ways to increase the effectiveness of Russia's sanctions and to close loopholes that allow the Kremlin to retain access to advanced technologies. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock stated during the meeting that the G7 countries have to make sure to remain united in its support for Ukraine and show Russian President Vladimir Putin that he will not be able to achieve his goals through exhaustion and war fatigue. During the Nuclear Energy Forum at the G7, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Canada, and Japan have announced an alliance to oust Russia from the international nuclear fuel market. Today, the Aurora 23 exercise will commence in Sweden. It will be Sweden's largest military exercise in over 25 years. 14 nations, represented by nearly 26,000 military personnel, will take part in the drill. Besides Sweden, the participants are the USA, Great Britain, Finland, Poland, Norway, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, Denmark, Austria, Germany, and France. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken stated at a press conference in Hanoi, Vietnam, that the recent leaks of the highly classified information on Russia's war in Ukraine and intelligence operations have not affected cooperation between the United States and its partners. Kazakhstan National Security Committee has launched 10 investigations into citizens who have allegedly participated in Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. The participation of Kazakhstani citizens in foreign armed conflicts could reportedly lead to prison sentences from 5 to 9 years. Slovakia has already sent to Ukraine all 13 MiG-29 fighter jets promised by the government. Countries neighboring the Russian Federation buy more and more German goods and, probably circumventing Western sanctions, sell them to Moscow. In December, the export revenues of German companies from Armenian businesses were 287% higher than the average for 2018 to 2022. Kazakhstan has also started buying more German goods. Export revenues of German companies increased by 210% compared to the average for 2018 to 2022. In Kyrgyzstan, the increase is as much as 1,157%. The changes in trade flows are so large-scale that analysts of the European Bank for Reconstruction speak of the Eurasian circumvent. German business representatives explain the trade boom by other factors. In particular, many German companies used Russia as a sales hub before the invasion. From there, they shipped these goods to Yerevan and Astana. Since this is no longer possible due to sanctions, deliveries are made directly to these countries. Also, the number of potential customers is increasing in Armenia and Kazakhstan due to many migrants from Russia. As a result of Russia's atrocities in the war against Ukraine, NATO countries are preparing to become a war-ready alliance again, as it was during the Cold War, ready to defend every inch of its member states' territory. NATO is rapidly moving from what the military calls deterrence by retaliation to deterrence by denial. Previously, in the event of a Russian invasion, member states had to hold out until Allied forces, mainly the US, came to their aid and retaliated to push the Russians back. But after the Russian atrocities in areas occupied in Ukraine, Poland and the Baltic countries no longer want to risk any period of Russian occupation. As in the first days of the Ukrainian invasion, Russian troops took land larger than some Baltic nations. And now for the intelligence report segment, starting with the UK Ministry of Defence. Mine-related civilian casualties continue to be reported daily in Ukraine. The most affected areas are Kherson and Kharkiv oblasts, areas Russia has previously occupied. With the arrival of spring and more people involved in agricultural activities, the risk of civilian mine incidents will increase. Over 750 mine-related casualties among civilians have been reported since the start of the invasion. 1 in 8 has involved a child. It will likely take at least a decade to clear Ukraine of mines. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. The Russian military command appears to be increasingly shifting responsibility for offensive operations in Ukraine to the Russian Airborne Troops, VDV. News of Teplinsky's reappointment suggests that the Russian MOD is seeking to work more closely with the Wagner Group in order to complete the capture of Bakhmut, despite obvious tensions between Prigozhin and the traditional MOD establishment. Teplinsky remains highly unlikely to restore the VDV to its prior status as an elite force due to widespread losses to the most elite Russian units. Russian mill blogger seized on an opportunity to denigrate St. Petersburg Mayor Alexander Beglov in a manner that indicates that Wagner Group financier Yevgeny Prigozhin's anti-Beglov campaign has permeated the Russian ultra-nationalist information space. The Wagner Group returned 130 Ukrainian prisoners of war, POWs, on April 16th, suggesting that Wagner may have engaged in the exchange independent of the Russian Ministry of Defense, MOD. Chechen Republic head Ramzan Kadyrov also commented on the prisoner exchange on April 16th. The Wagner Group may be attempting to force mobilized Russian personnel to sign contracts with Wagner, possibly in an effort to offset Wagner losses in Ukraine. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The enemy suffers considerable losses and concentrates its main efforts on conducting offensive actions in the Kupiansk, Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Marinka directions. During the day, our defenders repelled more than 50 enemy attacks on the specified areas of the front. Bakhmut and Marinka remain at the epicenter of hostilities. In the Kupiansk direction, the enemy conducted unsuccessful offensive actions near the settlement of Sinkivka. In the Liman direction, the enemy carried out offensive actions near the settlement of Spirne without success. The battles for the city of Bakhmut do not stop in the direction of Bakhmut. In the area of the settlements of Ivanivske and Predtechine, the enemy conducted unsuccessful offensive actions. In the Avdiivka direction, the enemy carried out offensive actions in the Novokalinove, Siverne, Pervomaiske regions of the Donetsk Oblast without success. In the Marinka direction, our defenders repelled numerous enemy attacks in the area of the Marinka settlement of the Donetsk Oblast. About 200 recently mobilized Russian servicemen from the reserve of the Russian occupation forces arrived inside Seve, Donetsk Oblast, to replenish their own losses in manpower. It was established that due to the lack of clear instructions regarding their further application, the short period of individual and collective training, and the unsatisfactory level of staffing with tangible property, these servicemen have a low level of morale and psychological state. Therefore, the new occupiers are looking for an excuse to avoid participating in hostilities. And with that, the report is finished. If you're interested in any of the articles I mentioned and want to read up on the details, you can find links to them in the description as usual. If you enjoyed the report and found it informative, please consider sharing it with others and giving me a like. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini!